It involves the AIS, which is an automated identification system transponder, and it involves falsifying the information that you are giving from that system. So it's different from jamming, it's different from turning it off. This is a proactive attempt to hide or deceive who you are and where you're going. When you talk about how else to go unnoticed on the high seas, there are other techniques. There is an extraordinary amount of emphasis being placed on AIS as the detection method, but there are other ways of detecting ships. That could be radar transmissions, it could be telephone transmissions. There are all sorts of different ways. So if you want to hide your location, you really need to know all of those and be taking proactive measures to defeat them. So AIS is perhaps the most simple, it's the most easy to spoof or turn off. But there are other ways of doing it, and flag state and obfuscating on your paper trail and your insurance and who owns you and who verifies you. These are very, very complex systems, and you can cheat basically all of them should you so wish. Well, they're essentially uninsured. I mean, quite often they're uninsurable because they're by definition too old and too poorly maintained to be insured. So they are effectively uninsured. They're quite often stateless. They're quite often flagless. Sometimes they have a flag of convenience, sometimes not. So there's this very sort of opaque line of ownership. And if you look at when you go back to the Houthis and the ships they were striking in the Red Sea, trying to work out where that ship came from, who owned it, who insured it, is always complex. So there's all these moving parts, and those that want to move into the dark ship oil around in the dark fleet will exploit those that complexity. For a long time, it was Iran and North Korea, and the sanctions regimes of the world were sort of focused on them. But of course, since February 2022, Russia have come barreling onto the scene, if that's the right expression, and that fleet is turbocharged. It's like the Iranian dark fleet, but on steroids, and is now hundreds, if not thousands, of vessels, including some of which that are now just drifting. They're not allowed in to their destination port, so the crew just get off and leave this behemoth floating around uncrewed with whatever cargo it had left on board. So it's a real problem in terms of environmental regulation, but also tracking and if necessary, and in the case of Russia, trying to minimize that flow to reduce the money that comes from it into Putin's war chest. Well, they have got almost the sort of ultimate surveillance set up in that ocean now. They've got, I think, 1/3 of US active ships are down off the coast of Venezuela. So when it comes to tracking, to maritime domain awareness, let's call it that, a sort of nice short term for what we're talking about here in terms of intelligence and understanding of the battle space. It's the thing that around the world is quite hard to do. We are too dependent on AIS, as I've said before. But if you take the US setup down off Venezuela, they have everything they need to be able to track to a high degree of certainty, particularly the bigger vessels. I still have my slight concerns about the smaller vessels and the narco smuggling technique they've adopted, but that's a separate subject. But now, when it comes to tracking this vessel, they've got everything they need to determine where it's come from, what its patterns are, what its operating history is, and therefore why it was a legitimate target to seize this time. The statistics would say yes, the shadow fleet is only going in one direction, and it's upwards. And I think to an extent we tried to impose some regulations on this. We had a thing called the oil price cap that came in early on in December of that year, and it was all to do with regulating the flow of oil. This was a strategic sort of attempt to manage this problem. And it hasn't really worked. In fact, in some ways, all it's done is created sort of more opportunities for ships to go across to the dark fleet, which is why the size of it is going up. So I don't see why that will stop. What's happening off Venezuela, this one seizure is very interesting. It's not going to arrest any sort of macro trends. But if it becomes the start of something, if this is the start of a campaign against these vessels, then maybe it could. I mean, I would just say, as an aside, the more of these sorts of things that go on, the more uncertainty there is in shipping, and the more it starts to cost. I mean, that is a second order effect here that people ignore at their peril. So the more uncertainty, the more people who are flouting the rules such as they are in international waters, the more confused this picture gets, and the more insurance and operations cost down the line. So what does this mean? I think one of the interesting second order effects in this is, what does this now mean for our legal ability to tackle Russian dark fleet ships transiting through UK and European waters? We've wrestled with this, and I don't think we found the right answer yet. Some have been boarded. The French boarded one a few weeks ago off San Jose. Estonians have boarded. The Danes have detained and boarded. It has happened, but it's been very, very sporadic. Is this now a sort of an indication that the UNCLOS 110 will allow us to verify these ships as they could go through our waters, and if necessary, board them, and if necessary, then detain them? This is something we've been very reluctant to do, I think partly because we might not have the resources to do it, which is the sort of embarrassing part. But it doesn't have to be 100% sustained campaign. All it has to do is inject that uncertainty in the operators of these ships and in the mind of Putin for it to have an effect, because it'll impose a cost. And we've seen him increasingly escorting dark fleet ships through our waters with warships, maybe in anticipation of this. So I think there's a really interesting month now as our lawyers and our system wrestles with what's just happened off Venezuela, and how do we apply that to what's going on with dark fleet ships in UK waters.